This is exciting.
Very exciting.
I think people have been wanting a part 2 for this podcast for a minute because we have Nick and David back. Woo!
Woo.
If you guys want to listen to our first podcast with these guys after or before, I will link it in the description below. It was such a good one. I've never gotten better feedback from a podcast than when you guys were on. So it's good to have you back. I think you just blew people's minds last time.
I was telling you before, I get texts and tweets all the time about that podcast.
I love it. So let's do a quick intro for the people who don't know you, and then we're just going to dive into stuff because already when you guys, you came in, we were hanging out, we were already getting into some really good conversations, and I was like, okay, guys, we need to put the mics in front of our mouth holes. Words are great. Nick, let's start out with you.
So I'm Nick. I feel like I was in a very different spot last time we recorded this podcast. I am basically a direct-to-consumer e-commerce retail brand consultant, and most notably, I guess, worked with Hintwater and built their direct-to-consumer, then went to VaynerMedia and built their direct-to-consumer, and then throughout the year I've just been consulting with a bunch of brands from Vox Media, launching a brand like Lemon Perfect, working with, brands like Cha Cha Matcha, who else? Some other fun ones in there. But basically just working with brands and helping them grow. That's kind of like my jam now.
I'm David PERELL. I run a writing school called Rite of Passage. So I have students right now in 28 countries.
I forgot about that. So much time has passed that you launched this huge thing.
Yeah. So we have students all over the place: Nigeria, Singapore, Chile, Panama, Australia, New Zealand, and it's a 5-week program, really intense, teach people how to become citizens of the internet, and we do that through writing. So it has blossomed into a global community of super intellectually curious people. And then beyond that, I have a podcast of my own. I'll publish on my website 200,000 words this year, which is roughly the equivalent of 3.5 books, and just an overall curious human being.
How often in between, tell me what you got going on with the newsletter and your site, and of course now with your course. But I think on this podcast and the people I'm around all the time, we're always talking about video and YouTube videos. Oh, posting 2 to 3 times a week, or, we clip stuff up. But I think writing is such not a lost art form, but it has changed so much. So it is always refreshing to talk to someone whose main thing is writing.
Yeah. So I have just like the way that the YouTube algorithm is designed and helps people who are prolific, the same thing also exists with writing. So I have a Monday newsletter called Monday Musings, a Friday newsletter called Friday Finds. The Monday one is the most interesting ideas that I have every week, and then the Friday one is the most interesting things that I come across every week, and that's more of a links newsletter. But the big thing that I've discovered about writing versus video is, in an aggregate sense, the world is moving towards video. So if you look at the explosion in the number of minutes of people watching YouTube, the Despacito music video, which is actually worth talking about in a sense because 6.5 billion people watched that video, making it the most seen maybe thing in human history.
In terms of videos.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic song and amazing video. And so if you just look at the average person, they're spending a lot more time watching video. But if you look at the very smartest people in the world, they are consuming more of the written word than ever. And for me, I don't really care about how many people I reach. I just care about reaching the smartest people in the world, and they are consuming information through text.
Which is something I think we can jump right into. One of the things we wanted to talk about is it depends what you want to do, but the most important thing isn't always just getting numbers. I remember in the beginning of my YouTube channel, it was all about finding the right people because I wanted production jobs. I wanted weddings. So I'm like, okay, if 100 people watch this wedding on my YouTube channel, maybe 2 are going to hire me for, $1,000 wedding. And so when you're looking at things in terms of I want to be YouTube famous, or I want to be a TikTok star. Of course, it's contextual to the platform, but in a lot of ways, if you look at it with, hey, I'm going to focus on reaching the right audience. Who is the right audience for me? I think that's when things can really change for you. You know, maybe for Nick, it's like, screw Facebook and YouTube, but what's my game like on LinkedIn and Twitter? Because that's where the people who you need to reach out are, right?
Yeah, there's I don't know if you've seen this platform, Community for Texting, but they
we've seen it.
Yeah, you guys have probably all seen it. But I mean, everyone from Gary Vee, Ashton Kutcher, Ninja, Marshmallow, G-Eazy, like everybody's on this texting platform. And I was with Zach Normandin, the Dirty Lemon founder, yesterday, and we were talking about how, you know, because Dirty Lemon's a text-based e-commerce platform, or that's how you buy the product, is you text in. And so, you know, we were talking about, well, you know, it's this game of, you have brands like Zach who focus on one-to-one interaction over text and then a transaction. And then you have brands like Brooklinen, which will send you like maybe 2 texts a day sometimes with sales. And
people don't get annoyed by that.
Well, people do get annoyed, but then it's also like, you know, we were talking about like how quickly this channel is going to become corrupt because anybody with a flip phone to an iPhone can get a text. It's very accessible. And so we were just talking about, again, back to like, how important is it with the people you're interacting with? If you text Marshmallow 5 times and you don't get a response, you are just going to give up, and you're going to realize that all you're going to get is localized ticket sales and merch drops.
That's what's happening with
album
Gary.
Drops. Yeah,
they're upsetting more people than I feel like they're making them happy.
Yeah, and so, you know, then we were talking about it in the context of how we use it, because he doesn't send anything out to customers. It's only if you want something, it's more of a convenience factor to text in rather than go use a site. It's a tool, yeah. And the way I use it is kind of similar, where like it's a place where instead of people, you know, DMing me and saying, can I have 5 minutes of your time, or can we chat on the phone for 15 minutes or get coffee? It's just like, well, just text me and I'll just get back to you on text. And yeah, just the point of like the importance of numbers, because at the end of the day, if your engagement dies, then you're kind of going backwards in what social media has become, which is like broadcast to really one-to-one, and then it goes backwards the other way.
Well, and you're going deep with people, which I hate the word payoff, but it'll probably pay off in
some
the
sense.
long
I mean,
run.
I've invested in a company that came in through the text platform.
There you
go. Chacha Matcha as a client came through that. Yeah. So it's paid off in its own ways.
Totally. And David, kind of talk to your audience who reads your newsletters, who reads your blog posts. And did you have the intention in the beginning with, okay, this is my ideal reader? Or did you notice that, the actual topics that I'm interested in, that I'm talking about, is actually curating a very interesting audience?
Yeah, more the second. So I always say that having an online audience is like having your own personal artificial general intelligence. So basically what you end up having is you have 2 different ones. The first is when it comes to recommendations of like, you have your own personal Google search. So whatever you need, you ask for recommendations. I get personalized recommendations from people who actually know me quite well. And what I can do is I can take a look at all the recommendations, see which ones are coming up time and again, and then whether it's a restaurant, a new city, or some kind of book recommendation or a podcast to listen to, once I see a couple people recommend them, then I say, I'll move that to the top of the queue. But then also in terms of what writing has been able to do is people share the writing, and the audience is a decent size. I'll get 1 million visitors on my site this year, but it actually gets up to for example, I've built a very close friendship and am now working on a project with the CEO of the most valuable startup in the entire world. I won't say who it is, but you can kind of infer who that is. And then there are certain investors that I'm able to meet with, early investors in Uber, Airbnb, and stuff like that. And then different conferences that you get invited to that are a bit private and stuff like that. And so time and again, I have noticed that what writing is great for is it's very good at being shared. And the actual people who I have always wanted to meet, the people who are obsessed with ideas, your writing just begins to attract those people. And what you're doing is you're almost sending like a radio frequency into the world. And that radio frequency is passing person A, person B, person C, person D. And then what ends up happening is the right people begin to find it. They get on your frequency and they end up subscribing to your newsletter and whatnot. And the amount of work that I do doesn't really increase, but the number of people that I reach does. And I'm always trying to increase the rigor and the erudition of the actual work that I'm doing. And then that work kind of gets passed along somehow through the back alleys of the internet and then makes its way to just some amazing people who I've been able to meet that were, even now at 25 years old, I've been in situations this year that are cooler than anything I thought I'd be in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. You have the writing course now, but what, in the beginning, when you're someone who just wants to write, you have a lot of ideas, you read so much, and you find this path where it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to write. What was the first way that you monetized? Because even with writing above anything else, I feel like with video, okay, you get a job at a production company, or there's tons of videos to be made, but I feel like reporters, even freelance reporters just get paid nothing, it seems like. So what was that? Was it intimidating in the beginning? What did you do in the very beginning?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a writer, you don't really monetize by writing. That is the big thing. It's sort of a marketing expense for the rest of your life. And what it does is it brings people into your life who can then create other opportunities. So a couple examples for you. If I want to start a business and I need investors, I will have no problem now raising millions of dollars because I'm building trust week by week with a certain number of people. Then in terms of my ideas, you mentioned that I read a lot. One of the things that I've changed around this year is I'm reading a lot less now and spending a lot more time in interesting conversations. So I've built an amazing intellectual posse almost of people in New York, and we have different book clubs and different discussion groups, and those happen multiple times every single week. So like every Tuesday night we have a religious studies discussion group. We hired a PhD in philosophy from Columbia to tutor me and a bunch of friends in philosophy, and the people who are in that group are basically some of my most interesting readers, of which, all these people reach out, and then you pick the ones who are the most interesting. And over time that begins to compound. And then you get these sort of accumulating advantages where interesting people reach out. You have more interesting ideas, then more interesting people reach out. And then finally, the way I've monetized this is through a writing school. We're going to do about $500,000 in revenue in our very first year. I didn't pay a cent in organic advertising. And ultimately what I want to be doing is to become some kind of center for the most interesting ideas from people, and then have those ideas be emailed to me sort of in their early instantiations. And so yes, on one hand, writing is a terrible way to make money, but on the other hand, it actually gets you in the room and opens the kinds of doors that are tremendously lucrative.
And that is the point, guys. So if you have something that you think can open those doors, that's what matters, not necessarily how much Google AdSense am I going to make off of if I get it to 100,000 views per week or stuff. There's so many different ways to look at it. And Nick, you've recently done the transition from working for companies to now working for yourself, but now more of the consulting vibe. You have a couple people under your wing helping you. First of all, how has that transition been for your person? Are you more stressed out? Are you less stressed out? How are you, Nick? Are you tired, Nick?
There's a lyric that I always say, I'm still alive, but I'm barely breathing. It's a grind. It's really a grind. Like it's really hard. There's a lot of things you just don't even think about. Like we were talking about things like even understanding contractors versus payroll and what payroll entails, hiring people, staffing properly, time management. I've noticed that my relationships with people have changed just because constraints of my time. I've started valuing, probably over the last like couple months, definitely started valuing my own personal wellness a lot more. So now I aim for like 8 hours of sleep a night, which has made a huge difference.
Good.
Shout out to 8 Sleep for that.
What is 8 Sleep? So like a Twitter account or something?
No.
Like, do you need a Twitter account to remind you to sleep 8 hours?
Sleep's a mattress. It's a mattress, but it's like it heats and cools on its own.
Okay,
and it helps you sleep 10 times better.
Interesting.
And so I've been getting like 8 hours of sleep. I've been working out pretty hard every day, and it's just made such a big difference. I don't go out as much. I don't really drink at all anymore. It's like it's a grind, but you learn to adjust to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I very much like the process because I also know it's not going to be here forever. Like it's not going to be like, 10 years later, I'm going to be grinding from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured, I was in a taxi the other day, and I was talking to the taxi driver. He makes an average of $200 a day, and $170. $70 goes straight to the company as the metered fees, and then $100 a day for leasing the taxi.
What?
So he nets like $30 to $50 a day driving a taxi.
What?
And I was just like, if this guy does this for 13 hours a day, I shouldn't really complain.
Yeah. Wow.
So
okay, Uber has to be better than that.
Well, that's what I said. I was like, bro, have you heard of Uber?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, but the problem is they don't give out any more. You have to basically get the TCP, like
the medallion thing. Yeah, but
they don't give those anymore.
Yeah, but if you're getting paid shit, then what's the point?
Totally. I mean, teach their own.
Like, I understand that they created this whole messed up system where people feel...
I was more shocked by the economics of a taxi driver. Mm-hmm. I was like, with $3,000 a month, you can lease a $100,000 car minimum. And, but it's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. That's insane.
Yeah. But anyways, it's been a grind.
Yeah. And let's talk about the logistics of consulting, because I had this epiphany the other day that, yes, I work for myself and I'm a YouTuber, but I'm essentially myself into client business. Yeah, exactly. Like all of the brands that I interface with and try to not make them upset by, giving them the video a day late or whatever. It's not the traditional agency sense at all. There's still a lot of, Sara Peachy personality. It's my content. But at the end of the day, when you're working with other people, you have people's expectations you have to worry about, right? And now that that's shifted from maybe 1 or 2 bosses to now, 5, 6 people with their own teams and their own problems and their own aspirations. Logistically, how do you manage all that? Or do you have like a battleground of like a Asana or like in Slack, or like what is your central hub for project management? So
I call it controlled chaos because I can't do the whole Asana thing, and I can't ever... I mean, I've tried this for years to get a proper notes app or organization app on my phone that syncs with my computer. It just doesn't work because I feel like I like to cross shit out. Yeah. And I like to scribble, and I like to make circles. So you're a physical,
so you have like a notepad?
I have a huge whiteboard, like a massive whiteboard in my apartment.
I love whiteboards, yes.
And then on my table I have a notepad, like a legal notepad, which I write on.
Look at all of us with our like
list.
Notepads and crap.
I have like, I love playing with pens with my fingers. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I have to write things out, and I have to circle things, and I have to draw. Like, I'm very visual in that sense. But that's like, getting a to-do list. But on a day-to-day level, I have gotten pretty good at my scheduling. So, I have an assistant now that's full-time, and she handles all my calendar. She handles basically anything that's just admin work that I don't want to spend my time doing. And that's helped out tremendously. I mean, shaved hours off my week. And then, outside of that, it's a lot of pre-planning. It's like, Sunday afternoons aren't, get drunk at brunch and go bar hopping. It's like you go home and you start planning for the week, and you know that the next day you have 5 important meetings and you make notes for each one of them, and you do your homework, and
it's just that's something that whenever I talk to someone and they're like, I'm gonna make the leap, I'm gonna work for myself and blah blah blah, but then very slowly they kind of start breaking it down and how they're scared and like, oh, but I really value this and that. And it's like, I don't think just because there's this wave of people making it cool doesn't necessarily mean that everyone cool has to run their own business. Because I'm like, guys, when you are at a 9 to 5, I'm sure, unless you work for a certain startup, you have time off, you have weekends, like you have proper weekends. And like, I think what people don't realize is when you're working for yourself, it really never stops. There's a certain thing, I guess, in me where I just, because I've always been doing it this way, I can't imagine it any other way.
That's me too. I don't see, I mean, like for Thanksgiving break, my family and I went to Yosemite. I was up we were on vacation. I was up at 6 a.m. I worked out. I went to the lobby with my laptop, and I was on my laptop till like 9. Yeah. Then we had breakfast, and then the laptop goes away. But it's like, I can't imagine what it's like to not be working. Good
for you though to take a vacay.
Yeah, right?
I don't think I've had one in a while. But no, it's a totally different. Yeah, and I think it has to do with the time of your life that you're into. Yeah. If you're not trying it in your 20s, what are you even doing? Like, this is the time.
Well, that's
to go
the thing. It's like I feel like
man.
You just go at it and see what happens, and worst case you get a job or whatever, but you can always pivot. But it's been fun, and I've realized that I get a lot more control over my schedule, which is nice. So like a few weeks ago, David and I just decided on a whim we're going to fly to Chicago for a concert. Which was a lot of fun.
What concert?
We went to go. So we saw, for David's birthday, we saw Millennium at Madison Square Garden.
Nice.
And then it was Dave. That was like a Friday or Saturday. His birthday was on a Sunday or Monday. We went to dinner, and a few drinks after, we ended up just buying flights and concert tickets in Chicago. It was such a good show.
Oh my gosh. So the same show.
Exact same show, like Love track it. For track. And it was, 10 times as fun.
Let's pivot, as you said, and talk about VC funding versus grassrootin'. Because Nick, you work with a lot of DTC brands or just lifestyle brands who are pumped with venture capital for better or worse. And so we're really in, I think, a system that is a little bit high on their own supply of just millions of dollars floating around. Really, anyone with a decent idea can grab onto it. And there's some good things that come from it, and I feel like there's some bad things that come from it. So from a person who's not working for these brands, but coming alongside them and helping, what are some things that you've noticed that, oh man, this came in clutch, because if they didn't have this, it would have been game over, versus what are they doing? With this millions of dollars?
A lot. Most of the companies that I work with have raised millions of dollars in venture. And, I think the biggest thing that gets taken away, especially in the earlier stages, is the creativity, because you got to be creative when there's limits. Like David, when you buy a piece of furniture, you're just like, oh, I'll just pay somebody to do it. It's much better, right? You just kind of throw capital at the problem. So that's what a lot of these startups are doing. A lot of them are just chasing, like, oh, did you see what this company did with their thing? That's what we want to do.
Right.
I get that all the time. But it's also, there's so much capital out there, so much capital, and it's on the venture side, it's a numbers game, right? Like they will put capital into 100 things and
just
hope that 2 of them pop.
Yeah.
And make all their money back.
I saw an interesting, you guys know of AngelList, but they put out this big report recently, and they were saying basically not the only way to win, but the trends that they were seeing is spread out your money, and you're bound to have 1 or 2 hits. So if you think something's a good idea, just invest. Well, that's easy to say. So they're starting I'm saying basically too much. Okay, that's my new word, guys. I'm establishing it now. Basically. It was before, and now it's basically. No more basically. I'm self-checking. I'm sorry, guys. But they're starting an index fund for startups and angelists. Interesting, right? Are normal people now going to be investing in startup index funds? I don't know. Is that the future? Does that seem as reliable as investing in a blue chip index fund? No. But it's an interesting world that we're living in.
Yeah.
Everyone wants a slice of the pie.
Everyone
That's
wants a
why
slice
the money's
of the pie,
out there.
And the craziest part is sometimes when I talk to investors, they just like they don't understand the business model sometimes. But sometimes it's a trendy thing that or it has a nice aesthetic and they'll put money into it. But I mean, you know, you see companies that raise $100, $200, $300 million, and then it's just crazy.
And it doesn't. Sometimes it's like what you said. It's trendy.
Yeah,
it really doesn't have any unique advantage. It really doesn't solve.
Look at Casper, right? Yeah. Casper has raised so many millions of dollars.
How many? Do you know? I'm gonna look it up.
I don't check Crunchbase though.
Okay.
Maybe David, you can check. And even Away, right? They've raised almost $200 million.
Wow.
And some of these companies, like I don't know what the need for raising an insane amount of capital like that is, but you know, most of it goes straight toward marketing.
Yeah. It's
and
$340 million, by the way.
For Casper?
Yeah.
It's insane. And then they have to keep, rebranding themselves. They went from a mattress company. Now I think they're about sleep. Away is they sell a suitcase, but they're about travel.
Everyone goes from this one product to, oh no, but it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. And a lot of it's just smoke and mirrors. And I mean,
to be fair, I do enjoy my Away suitcase.
Away is a great suitcase.
I will say they were in the headlines recently, guys. We're not going to go into it, but they did replace their CEO. But that hard shell suitcase has stuck with me for the past 3 years, and I still use the same one.
Yeah, I still have the one you gave me. It's
pretty durable. Heck yeah. Oh yeah.
Remember that?
Forgot about that. Yeah. The black one. Yep.
Yeah. But you know, a lot of these companies are just not going to be recession proof. Mm-hmm. When people become strapped for cash, they're just gonna, a lot of these companies are just gonna starve because their entire business model is predicated on just going out and fishing for customers every single day. And the second they can't do that, they're going to starve.
And how crazy is it for us in our age group? 25.
I'm 23.
23, which is so crazy when I'm always reminded that you're younger than me. I hate that, Nick. It's crazy, though, that we ourselves haven't lived through really a recession.
Yeah. In
our adult life. Our poor parents, had to go through 2 back-to-back in 01 and 07, our poor parents. But we've really gone through this 10 years of just everything's fine. Everything's okay. Everyone's being weighed down by college debt, but everything's fine. Yeah. Right?
It's that meme with the fire going on.
Yeah, everything's fine. I promise. David, let's talk about venture capital and grassrootin. What does grassrootin mean for the people out there?
I don't know. You tell me.
Okay, well, am I saying it right? Bootstrapping. Why did I say grassrootin? I am on a roll today. This has been a common theme that I literally take words and just make them completely different things.
You're naturally creative. I have a theory about
call
this.
It that.
No, I'm totally serious. I have a theory about this. So many of my best ideas have come from getting things entirely wrong. Coming up with a new idea.
Bootstrapping is now grassrootin, guys.
Grassrootin. Somebody else saying that that's a good idea and then just running with it. Right? Like, how many times have you been editing a video and you've said, I'm going to do this, and then you've made a mistake, and then that mistake led you to something that was much more interesting than what you already had?
That's the story of my college life. I mean, when I was doing electrical engineering and I was trying anything and everything, seeing what was sticking on the wall, that's when really I found my voice in video. So, yeah. I should probably nail down my words better.
So grassrooting for everyone.
Since I'm a podcaster. It's crazy that, a person who has over 60, 70 episodes of a podcast, and she's terrible at talking. Anyways, David.
Sara.
It's Sara.
From Texas.
From Texas. I'm like a fusion of Southern and Northerners. Northerners. You know what? Okay, I'm going to do one more tangent. Do you guys listen to Office Ladies podcast? Did you watch The Office?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's Pam and Angela, and they started a podcast, and they're taking each episode and doing a rewatch, and then telling you little nuggets and things that the viewers didn't know.
Wow, the internet is amazing. Example 8,074,000.
Exactly, it's the best thing ever. But Angela was recently talking about how she's from Texas and Louisiana, and she can't say verb like whenever there's a vowel in front of an L. I'm trying to think of what example. Say call. Or call. Yeah, call. Or what was the example she gave? But I basically resonated with it. I'm gonna cut this entire thing probably. But when she said, I was like, that's so true. Those are the words that I struggle with. I don't sound like a Texan, right? But sometimes the words, I have a certain draw, and it comes out. Anyways,
one thing that I do really like about the internet is commentary culture.
Yeah.
So a couple things come to mind. So once you get the background of something, all of a sudden that thing becomes way more interesting. Okay. My favorite example of this is all the restaurants that go on Chef's Table and then become super popular, right? So you go and you see Noma for Copenhagen, and all of a sudden people are going to these amazing restaurants because you see behind the scenes.
Cool, yeah.
Behind the scenes culture is fascinating to me, and little embarrassed to admit this, but it's a true story, and I'm confident in my identity. My friend landed in New York, and I sent him the Welcome to New York music video of the live tour.
Okay.
This is a 4.5 minute performance, and I was almost in tears. I was like, this is peak human ingenuity. Taylor Swift is up there just rocking it.
It's a live performance?
It's a live performance of her in Sydney, Australia.
Okay.
And Welcome to New York is her outro. Or sorry, the first thing that she says. So she gets up on stage. She's got these glasses. She comes out, and everyone in the audience has lights. So they have coordinated lights. And then whoever edited this video did an amazing job of overlaying the visuals with the video.
So was it like a fan edit?
Slow-mo. No, it was super professional edit. So then... This was from her I think 1989 world tour. So I went on Spotify and I listened to all the commentary for the 1989 world tour.
Honestly, that would probably be fascinating because whenever Taylor Swift came out with her Red album, because I never liked country music, so I never really got into her. Then she made the Red album. I was hooked. All like the drops that she had in her music, the way she was fusing pop in different genres. By the way, I figured out the word. It was filthy. Filthy. It's very hard to say words like that without being Southern. Say filthy. It's very hard to just say filthy. Say filthy.
Filthy.
Okay. All right. Filthy. That's what you do with vowels in front of ales.
You need a separate character.
if you're from the South. Anyways, I love Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift started off country. I mean, Nashville, sort of like you.
Yep.
Born and raised, sort of. What is that? The
Bible Belt.
The music part of Nashville is away from downtown Nashville. It's over kind of by Vanderbilt, where all the studios are, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was only there for 9 months. I'm born and raised in Dallas, and then I moved to Nashville for only 9 months. But it's everywhere, dude. Country music is Nashville.
Yeah.
It really is. It's just everywhere you go, every restaurant has a different tone because they don't have the pop stations on. It was a very unique place that I got out of very quickly. It's very cool though. Just wasn't for me. Let's get back to bootstrapping. Now that I
grassrootin bootstrapping.
Grassrootin tootin'.
Well, I think that if you look at the global investment market, venture capital represents like 2% of all the money that goes into it. So it is an extremely small.
So maybe it's just starting.
Part of, well, maybe. But it's an extremely small part of the entire investment world. But it gets the outsized influence because the small percentage of success stories from venture capital do end up going to become the super big companies. And one of the weird paradoxes that we have is everyone's like, oh, this is the golden age of entrepreneurship. But the actual rate of new company formation in America is going down.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a peculiar thing. Now, there are some interesting explanations for this. One thing that's interesting is that in 1960, 40% of the time when you got a new job, you ended up also moving house. Now that number has gone down to 10%. The number of Americans who are moving across state lines is also going way down. And there was a book called The Complacent Class by Tyler Cowen that sort of recounts this in detail, basically saying that Americans are becoming more complacent, more stagnant, less dynamic than ever. And it's a weird sort of narrative thing to consider with all of the venture capital that is actually getting the outsized attention. So you end up in this very, like, one of my core beliefs about what to work on is to work on things that are outside of the spotlight, because everybody works on things that are inside the spotlight. Like, one thing is, you see this in certain statistics. In 2007, 50% of Harvard graduates went into either investment banking or management consulting. 50% went into two jobs. And what you see is the entire Ivy League school system and the entire track of where we're putting people into is basically investment banking, management consulting, and then you could add law and medicine. That's sort of the track that you come out of these Ivy League schools with. So what you end up finding is those are the places where there's tons and tons and tons of competition. And those are the jobs and the industries that swallow ambitious people who aren't ambitious because they want to work on something that is transcendent or something that comes from their own internal desire. It is ambitious people who think that just because something is competitive, it is worth working on.
And they want to be first
within
the system.
Exactly. So what you actually end up seeing going back to venture capital is the percentage of companies that succeed is very low. And even if in aggregate, venture capital in a world where it's low interest rates, where it's very hard to actually have a good return on your money, I could see, venture capital might be a good place where to put your money, but you actually talk to these entrepreneurs and half of the companies, it seems, are totally fraudulent, run by people who are wildly incompetent.
Why are people so scared of using that fraudulent word? Because, I mean, you see it on the biggest scale, what we're seeing with freaking WeWork, and it is downright just the numbers do not match up. It is propped up by hype. Remember when everyone thought they were the smartest people because they read that article about WeWork isn't a startup, it's actually a real estate company or something. And so collectively, everyone was like, oh yes, WeWork, so smart. They're buying up properties and blah, blah, blah. But their economics didn't make sense. The money, and I think there's this notion of spend. You'll worry about monetizing later. Yeah. And it's like, whoa. What happens when you, even SaaS companies, when you have a tool, this is a tool that has innate value to people, and you could just charge maybe $10 a month to start out, and maybe that's not the right pricing, you figure that out. But when you're giving away stuff for free and then people just expect everything for free, and then 10 years, maybe 5 years later, you decide to monetize, you freak everyone out.
Yeah, I mean, so the alternative to venture capital, and this is the side of the economy that people don't see. The economy is so much bigger than people realize. There are people who do the most random thing. If you look at your zipper, it is probably made, yep, mine is made by YKK. It is a Japanese company that's worth like hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have a near monopoly on making zippers. And then there are people, my friend owns a business that makes the filament, you know, like when you walk by an office space and there's that cover on glass so that you can't actually see through it.
Right across the street.
So there is globally one company, one of a couple companies. Apparently this is extremely hard to do and requires very specialized knowledge. He owns this business. And my point is, there is so much visibility into venture capital. We're going to build the next Facebook, or finance and management consulting. We're going to go into these industries that everybody else is going into, and therefore it's worth our time. Where the happiest people in aggregate that I meet are people who raise no venture capital. They're running their own businesses. They have a very low cost basis. Often they're software companies. They don't have a lot of competition. They solve some kind of narrow problem, and a large percentage of them are making millions of dollars a year. They have a couple employees. No one's ever heard about them, and they're basically invisible in the world. And I think that we should be promoting that so much more than this venture capital lunacy fiasco that we've gotten into, even though it has built some amazing companies, and even though some of the very best people I know are venture capitalists. We need to remember that as an industry, venture capital is almost too good at marketing for society's good.
Unpack that last statement, Nick.
Boom. What was that last statement?
Venture capital is too good at marketing for society's good.
It's
oh my
like
God.
they're
Well, yeah, every VC is basically like their own personal brand now.
Yeah,
it's like it's a thing if you're an investor that you have a Twitter following and you have your blog and a newsletter and your weekly roundups and it's interesting.
It's a whole world.
It's a whole
crazy.
world.
And I think what a lot of people, I wouldn't say don't like, but they bring up that some of the smartest people in the world that should be working on real problems are trying to start the next Facebook. And there's this argument that, hey guys, how do we reward people who are actually working on problems that will change everyday life of transportation and energy and all of these things that I think people are yearning for answers, but it's not super sexy to go on. And maybe because people see the financial rewards of starting the next Facebook or something, they don't want to venture down that path of let's try to solve solar panels and blah, 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 etc. Yeah, that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah,
Thoughts,
I agree.
Nick?
I mean, I completely agree with everything David said.
Any more thoughts, David? I see you churning over there.
Yeah, there's also just so many opportunities and things that people are actually struggling with that these are just massive markets. And if you're trying to work on the kinds of projects that there's going to be economic demand for, there's obvious solutions.
Yeah.
For example, the world is becoming an old person's home. We have a massively aging population.
Yeah.
We have a massive class of baby boomers that are about to get older and older. I've seen it with my grandparents on both sides. I've lost both my grandfathers, and then both my grandmothers are both fairly old. And I was on the phone with my grandmother last week. She hates being in an old person's home.
So, yeah, my grandparents on my dad's side they're on their third home. And so much of it is just crazy. The way that it actually doesn't meet the needs that they need. They felt like the first one they were in, they felt like they were living in a hospital. And, you know, for people who have built their lives and are used to living decent lives, and then you stick them in this hospital environment that they're still paying like $10K a month for, because the point is that you're close to medical professions if anything happens, right? But they had to go through a few more transitions, and now they're actually at a place that is cheaper because they're essentially not living on top of a hospital now, but there's still professionals around. But it's more like a normal apartment, and they have walls to hang their art on. And there's certain just niches within that, like you're saying, that, oh my gosh, guys, if you think about that, our world is running on baby boomers right now. Look who's in office. Just look at the world we're in. We're living in a baby boomer world. What are some solutions you can come to for that? Right. That's so true.
There is the best way of describing San Francisco, and it's due to the venture capital model, is that San Francisco is assisted living for young adults.
I love that.
Which I've always loved. You know, it's like your dry cleaners and stuff. But like, there's actually a huge market for assisted living for old people.
Guess what? Those people have been building up their nest eggs for the past 60 years, and they're ready to spend.
It's a huge market.
You know?
And it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And that is the kind of thing that I worry that maybe the Japanese are going to outrace us here, because they already have that aging population. So just right there, that's one place that you can go. And look at me. I have a niche little writing school that is wildly profitable year one, and we're not going to raise any venture money. I have students all over the world. I get to do basically whatever I want all day, because it's such a perfect match for my skill set, what I like doing, and what the world needs. I work with one person who's in Mexico City. I work with another one who's in Los Angeles, and we all do this remote thing. It's a very small little minor problem that I had that I wanted to solve for other people. And there's 3 of us in the organization, and the school's made more than $1 million, right? So it's like, there are so many of these little niches, and the big thing is you have to just realize that what everybody is focusing on, almost by definition, is like the things that you shouldn't be focusing on. But we live in an entire world that's hyper imitative, where everyone just imitates what other people are doing. And so like, what is in the news is people think of, oh, this is the new hot thing, I need to get into it. I actually think of that as a negative signal. So if something is popular in the news, everybody's talking about it, that means I have a lot of competition. So let me go somewhere else and build something that either solves my own problems or solves the problem of somebody that I love or a market that I know well, and don't raise any venture money. Nobody's talking about this, but it seems to be a big piece of low-hanging fruit in society.
100%. I think this is a good moment to talk about how, our parents kind of have no idea what we're doing.
I would take a bit of a different tack on this question, that I think that the more interesting orientation here is that there are certain things about this world that are fundamentally different, and we've come to a time where the things that worked for people for so long no longer actually work. We've had, for example, in education, we've had inflation credentialism, where what happened was in the 1950s, 1960s, my dad was born in 52, my mom 58. When they went to college, it wasn't nearly as competitive, and you could actually get a pretty good job right out of college. Now what you've actually been seeing is that college now isn't enough. So then you take out loans for college, then you go to graduate school, and it's like you're following this track for more and more years, which is why you end up having all these people who are 6 figures in debt, 30 years old. They say, oh my goodness, I'm hyper educated, I can't get a job. What's going on here? And you have that showing up all over the place. If you look at the percentage of people who are, say, call ourselves digital natives now, the percentage of us who own a house at our age, it's actually gone way down, right? So you have our parents who are saying, when are you going to buy our home? When are you going to buy your first car? Turns out things are a little bit different due to the way that money is structured in society. And so what I have said is, I'm not going to follow the track that my parents had assumed I was going to follow. I'm going to set out my own path a little bit more. And the funny thing here is I don't even know what I'm doing sometimes, but it took a lot of courage to say, you know what, I have a felt sense that this isn't going to work. I remember telling one of my teachers senior year spring, right as school was beginning to end, this college system that you're running here, I always say I graduated in 2016. I had the best communications education for 1996, 20 years behind. And I remember telling her exactly this. She thought I was crazy. And I said, I'm sorry, but I think that the vast majority of colleges are going to be out of business in 20 years. She looked at me.
If we let them fail, David.
She looked at me like I was going to be crazy. Last year, Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School professor, predicted that in the next 10 to 15 years, 50% of American colleges are going to go out of business.
Please. Sure. Yes. Let them fail. I think that's what people keep screaming. And it's like, you gotta, so many things have to change, you know, like fundamentally, like the loans that are going out too. It's like, well, the reason why prices keep going up and up and up is because these banks and ultimately the government are giving these loans to anyone and everyone. And so it's like, well, of course the college is going to take the free money.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the people, you know, you can hear what I'm saying and you're like, oh my goodness, when is the future of education going to arrive? I'm so worried. The future of education arrived 10 years ago.
It's called youtube.com.
It's called youtube.com. It's called the internet. Basically, whatever you want to learn, it's right there for you. And the only barrier between you and where you want to be when it comes to learning, it starts with a D and it ends with discipline. And that is now the binding constraint on getting people skilled who have access to an internet connection and the time to actually learn.
What would you say to the people who say, hey, I need the structure of college? What would you say to the people who are struggling with that discipline to self-learn?
Yeah, it's tricky because I have some people who I'm very close to who say exactly that. And so there's one tack on this that I say, well, toughen up. You know, you have all of these amazing opportunities right at your fingers. Team up with some friends, have set some kind of a learning plan. I always say that people, it's wild to me. You know, if you look at LeBron James's statistics of his field goal shooting percentage, his first year in the NBA, shot like 46. He was at 58% field goal shooting percentage in 7-8 years. That was because he hired a coach. He showed up to practice every day. He set a dedicated health and fitness plan to improve his skills. Why don't knowledge workers do this? People are trying to learn how to code. They're trying to learn how to use Excel really well. How many of those people are learning like an athlete? How many of them are actually setting these regimented goals? The answer is very few. So one answer on this is toughen up. The second one, which I'm also sympathetic to, but not... I don't want this to be an excuse for everybody, is that we have trained people to be very dependent and have basically neutered their evolutionarily driven drive to actually go on and pursue opportunities on their own. And that's a problem. But at the same time, if you have been trained for the first 2 decades of your life to only do things that are clearly on the syllabus, to only go to the after-school dance that your mom has planned for you, to only go to the birthday parties that your dad is arranging, then I can totally see how it's very hard for you to figure those things out. And that is a challenge. So I think that the answer is somewhere in between, but you have all the tools right there, and it's important for people to take agency themselves because of what you can do with all the world's information in your pocket now.
Are you a dropout?
No, I graduated.
Okay.
I threw the tassel from right to left, threw the hat in the sky, and said hallelujah. Okay. I did it.
Debt? Do you still have debt?
No debt.
No debt. Okay, good.
No debt.
Good. Because I was about to say, we're 3 college dropouts here, or you didn't even go.
I didn't even start.
Yeah, Nick didn't even. Nick, he figured it out, man. He was like, I'm not even starting this.
To be fair to Nick, and I say this with love, he wouldn't have lasted a day in college. He didn't have a choice.
Which is great that you had that self-awareness, though, because I think, I mean, still in 2012 when I graduated high school, I didn't think that there was an option, right? And so it took me 3 years to even come to that conclusion. And it literally wasn't until I watched a Gary Vee video where he just said something super simple to a question someone had: why do you have to stay in college? And I was like, wait, that's an option?
Yeah.
Interesting, you know? And then so I think it just starts, that's why people are probably getting very annoyed how much I talk about this, but it's like, this is the hill that I'm going to die on. If I can get someone to not go 100K into debt for something that they hate, then I have done my job.
Well, the other thing that I would say is there's a lot of alternative forms to college. And so community college is wildly underrated.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying to people. You should watch these videos that I've made. I'm like, if you feel like college, if you feel like you don't know what you need to do and you need to explore a little bit, guess what? You can spend $2K for a semester instead of 10, 20, 30, 40.
Yeah. I mean, I took David's school recently, so I graduated from something.
Are you a better writer now?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I learned from David's school was how to gather knowledge in a more organized way, because I'm very disorganized with the way I consume content.
Right.
But now I have a very strict regimen. If I find something I want to read, there's a process of how I read it so that I can access that knowledge later.
So does that mean a regular reading schedule? What is that?
No, not at all. It just means, so if I see an article come out that I want to read, I will save it to Instapaper. Then on my own time, I'll go to Instapaper, read the article. I can highlight things that are interesting. And then that automatically saves into Evernote. And whenever I want to reference it again later or, look up something around the topic of what I read, then those highlights come back.
That's cool.
Which just makes it much easier.
You got some process, Nick.
You got some process.
Evernote. What's that called? Instapaper?
Instapaper to Evernote. But there's a plugin between that.
Yeah, so I have a workshop called the Smart Sync Workshop that is free on YouTube. So it's 1 hour long, and you will see the entire system. We can put it in the show notes, Smart Sync Workshop, and you will see exactly what Nick is talking about. This system is a cheat code, Sarah.
What is the plugin in between?
So basically it's a app called Readwise, which is an API integration. So it's super cutting edge. So it's a bit of a cut and paste sort of duct tape kind of solution. But if you can imagine all the best of what you read saved in your pocket, instantly accessible for the rest of your life. That is what I teach people how to do, and then help them turn that into writing. It always mind boggles me. One of the things that I strongly believe in is never do the same thinking twice if you don't have to. So if you've read something and you've had a thought that's intelligent, capture it down, save it in a solid note-taking app that has instant search functionality, and boom, in 30 years, you can access that same idea. And that way, what you end up doing is you get a lot more mileage from your ideas because you don't have to go and recreate them. And so for me, using this system, I'll publish 3.5 books this year, as I said before, and I don't write for more than 10 hours a week. So I am extremely efficient in what I'm able to do, and part of it comes from a writing system, but also part of it, the biggest thing that people get wrong in terms of trying to learn how to write. How can I learn to write? Oh, I'm going to go read Stephen King's On Writing or Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. The biggest thing holding people back from writing better is having a note-taking system. Writing is not nearly as hard as people say, but the entire education system for writing was built before note-taking systems existed, and that right there is the secret.
It's fascinating to me that you said you only write 10 hours a week.
Yeah. If that.
Really?
I'll do maybe 6 hours this week.
So is it the fact that you sit down and instantly you're in it?
I'm so in it. My process is dialed down.
Yeah.
It's the same ones I teach my student. And I have that process. I sit down at my computer.
So
I compile exactly what I need to.
Zero friction.
And boom, zero friction. I'm in a flow state in 3 minutes. I set I do for at most 90 minutes. I never write for more than 90 minutes a day. And I set a really ambitious goal for myself, and I get in the flow. I turn on the kind of music same music when I write versus listening or versus working out at the gym. It is the same state of mind. It is, let's get after it, let's go, and let's accomplish so much in a super short amount of time.
Interesting. I wish I could limit my video editing to 10 hours a week. Nick, you've been on the West Coast and now recently the East Coast.
Correct.
And so recently I posted a apartment tour, and with that, people are always triggered with, why do you pay that much in New York City? And the argument that I never want to get in, because I've made one video and I'm done talking about it, is certain cities afford you certain opportunities that just make it worth it. And so it'd be interesting to hear some of the differences, maybe what you like better, what you don't like as much, of San Francisco versus New York, because they're very different, but I think they're on a very similar playing field in terms of opportunities. It's just different industries.
Yeah.
Let me go to the bathroom real quick.
Go to the
Let's
restroom.
take a quick bathroom break.
Okay.
I got hip disease.
You can, I mean,
I
you
can keep
want to
going?
answer it? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can keep going.
I mean, in San Francisco, my favorite spot was the airport. And I don't know. I just wasn't that big of a fan of the city. I think probably because the industries that I work within were not necessarily a priority there. It was more tech and code, and Hint was there, but that was kind of an anomaly. I find New York a lot more fun. I find it a lot more culturally diverse. I find it a lot more happening. There's always things to do. I find it a lot more, there's a lot more art here in New York with music and like content creators and even just artists, like murals on the walls everywhere. There's a lot more fashion and style. I like New York is like, it's for somebody to get to New York, you have to hit some kind of level of success prior to getting here. And so it's a really highly qualified melting pot of so many industries that I personally relate to.
We just so happen to be on this really tiny island together.
Yeah.
That's all stacked up.
Which is all stacked up, and
so you're
it's
gonna
the
be
hardest place to
bumping
get
shoulders.
into.
Yeah.
And that's when, I mean, if you look at like people who complain about rent, compare it to, but in Idaho you can get a house for this, and it's like, cool,
dude,
go live in Idaho.
I know.
And make that kind of money to get a house like that.
Yeah.
But it's it's the tax of living here, and it's also, in my opinion, I think it's great because it's what's that, survival of the fittest, right? It's like if you can make
it here, you can make it anywhere.
Then you move out, and maybe you try something else. But
there's no room for complacency here.
Yeah, no room for complacency. And there's one thing I actually noticed, which was interesting. There is, in San Francisco, it's all about a who's who. It's like, what startup does that guy have? How much money has he raised? Who are his VCs, whatever. Over here, it's like, I mean,
just what are you
there's
doing?
The same thing, but it's also like, what are you doing? Yeah. And everybody here is hustling. Like, everyone here is working so hard. And there's a very mutual respect between a lot of people, regardless of what stage they might be in life or financially or whatever. Everybody's like working really hard here. And that's, I don't know, I appreciate that. Cause
that's what I touched on. That's kind of what I
built myself on.
Totally. On the last podcast was really, if you have something interesting going on in your life, or maybe you have a somewhat unique skill. I mean, there's so many people who are willing to give shots here. We're all just trying to, make our things. And if you come here and you want to, maybe you're willing to help someone on something, I think it's the one city that you can do the apprenticeship thing really quick, and you could get to exactly where you need to go in literally a year. I mean, wow. Some people think of the college process of 4 years, and then maybe an apprenticeship, or 4 years, and then maybe your master's, and then you apprentice and you get your first job. And
do you mean internship?
Do I what?
Do you mean internship or apprenticeship?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, in the creative field, I more think of it as like an apprenticeship with a specific person. I guess that's how I differentiate those words. I'm not talking about internship getting coffee at freaking Vogue.
Right.
You're probably not going to be doing anything special, you know? But if you can really get into it with maybe a 5-person digital agency and they're really hands-on, I mean, you could be doing really important stuff if you can prove yourself. And I think there's more opportunities for that in those circumstances. So you got to do a little bit of work up front, figure out what people are doing and the right places to go. But I like the city a lot.
Same. I don't see myself moving anytime soon.
Yeah. What about you, David?
Let me get on my soapbox a little. I'm obsessed with this question. I am obsessed with what's happening in cities right now. And I'll sort of give my theory, and then I think Nick did a really good job of talking about the qualitative ideas of cities. I can provide some of the quantitative empirical data around cities. So cities are merry-go-rounds. If you look at a merry-go-round, you get on the merry-go-round, and the merry-go-round goes around, and you're in something together with people, and you expend very little energy to go fairly fast, and you see all of these new things, and there's horses, and there's donkeys, and all this sort of stuff, and there's all these cool things on merry-go-rounds that are like the coolest things at the park, right? They're like well-designed and stuff like that, and you always get on, and it's just like kind of a party, right? Cities are the same way. But the problem is the merry-go-round spins really fast. And what you're seeing is that once you get on the merry-go-round, just like what Nick said, well, you have access to all these amazing opportunities. It seems like everyone comes into New York who is of any bit of importance a couple times a year, and they will then reach out to go meet with you. Nick is able to he's at the epicenter of the direct-to-consumer industry, and what Nick has is access to through parties of being able to talk to these people. So just like a merry-go-round, the city is moving really fast, and by virtue of being here and being in this ambient flow of New York City, he has access to all the different people on the merry-go-round. The problem is the problem and the good thing is that the merry-go-round is spinning faster and faster. So on the positive side, you have that cities are becoming even bigger hotbeds of economic opportunity. Cities have, since the 1970s, we have seen a concentration in terms of wealth creation. For example, the top 25 metro areas have experienced more than half of the growth of the $19.5 trillion of American GDP. So what you're seeing is this concentration in cities. In Texas, where you're from, Houston, Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio have grown so much that across the four in the last 10 years, they have grown as much as the city of Seattle. Wow. They have added that big population to those four cities, whereas the metro areas in Texas have decreased. Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing is I spent this summer 18 days
metro as in the suburbs?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. So the smaller ones. Thanks for the clarification. Just to go study this firsthand, I spent 18 days in Michigan this summer, went to every single major city in Michigan with the exception of Flint. In 1942, Detroit had a bigger economy than every single country in the world, with the exception of Great Britain, Russia, and Germany. And now part of that was that a lot of the military manufacturing came in and moved to the Ford factories during the war. And so there was actually an inflation in Detroit productivity there. But my point is, cities are now seeing this explosion. And that's because knowledge workers, people who work in creative industries like yourself and like Nick, they benefit from this clustering idea. So economists call this agglomeration effects. Normal people call it clustering. When you're around other smart people who are also creative, then you become more creative. Now, the problem is the actual cost of living in cities has gone up a ton. So what you have is in places like San Francisco, the median home price has like doubled in the last 8 years of San Francisco housing. That's how you have the people who watch your videos say, Sarah, what are you doing? It is getting so expensive there. And it's because we are not allowing a lot of new building in our cities. So the first problem I would
think isn't that more primarily San Francisco than New York though?
New York too.
Really?
New York too. Well,
I feel like we're seeing new buildings come up everywhere.
True, but compared to the actual increased demand for people living here, it's very slow.
Okay.
So you're like, okay, how do we fix housing prices and the cost of cities? That's the real reason why people can't live here. And you saw this with your videos. So there's two things. So the first is letting more people on the merry-go-round, and you could have that. New York has a very large minimum apartment size. So like in a place like Paris or Hong Kong, the minimum amount of space that you can live in is much smaller. And so that is one thing we could do. We could also allow more building. Fact of the matter is, that's not going to change. It just isn't. There are very strong incentives from homeowners to not allow new building because that inflates the value of their homes, and they don't want to do that. The other one that I think is more interesting and counterintuitive is to increase transportation speeds. In 1996, there was a crash on the Williamsburg Bridge where a train crashed into the one in front of it. One person died, the conductor. There were a couple injuries. Since then, we have slowed down transportation speeds across the entire MTA, and we still haven't increased them. So the New York subway system has actually gotten slower in the last 20 years, and more than half of New York subways on the 456 line are delayed on your average weekday. In Hong Kong, if a train is more than 8 minutes late, they have to report the reason why to the government. That is how good their subway system is. And if we had faster transportation, what we would be able to do is have people live farther away from cities and commute in. But because we don't have fast transportation and we're not allowing new building, we can't get more people on this merry-go-round.
We're car obsessed though. So how do you change that? I mean, everyone knows that our train system is a shit show and it could be light years better, but everyone just says it's the system. It doesn't allow it. No one wants to invest in the railways and the Amtrak and, even beyond just subways. And so it's like, well, how do you fight an entire system that's been put in place since they were cranking out the cars in the 40s in Detroit? Because everything, it seems like, revolves around the auto industry.
Right. Well, there are solutions to this. They are just very politically difficult to do. If you look at Singapore, they had some major traffic problems. They instituted a congestion tax, meaning that, and we have one for taxis in New York. I was looking at the data last night, but under 96th Street, if you start a cab ride, you just pay a flat fee to basically increase the cost of that ride, which theoretically decreases the amount of cabs on the road. But, it still costs $15 to commute between New Jersey and New York, but still we could have a bigger tax on people who are in New York. The Washington Bridge has the worst traffic of any place in all of America for roads. And it's getting worse now because we have the UPS and the FedEx trucks who are blocking lanes. So a congestion tax, basically a tax on driving in cities, would make people drive less, but it's very unpopular and hard to do in America.
Because in a city of taxes in New York, is more taxes the answer? I mean, it really comes to, when you say the crazy growth in Texas taxes are nothing. There's a reason why Toyota has moved their entire HQ down to Texas. There's a reason
Charles
why
Schwab just left San Francisco.
Okay, all of these companies are moving to Texas because they're very business friendly, and there's space, which is one thing, but I think there's something to say politically too, where it's like you have these, and maybe it's because they're able to have these certain policies because, again, in Texas, you have more room than in New York, right? In New York, it's literally a space issue. It's like there's limited space.
Yeah.
So
there's an idea that I really like. So if you look at the entrepreneurs so there's people like us who, so in general, this very general statement, but people who get paid in equity are in San Francisco and New York. That's just where the high growth companies are. People who get paid in cash are moving to Texas. People like Tim Ferriss,
capital gains
Ryan Holiday, because of capital gains. So you actually
Tax
see
lower.
in terms of the kinds of entrepreneurs who live in each city, it is very responsive to the tax code. And that's why so many people are moving to Austin. But almost all the entrepreneurs who are moving to Austin that I know have businesses that spin off cash because of exactly this.
Right. For someone who's obsessed with the internet and the companies that are springing from this, I say new digital age, but we've been here for the past 5 years. We've been in this crazy DTC, YouTube influencers. I mean, we've arrived, right? In terms of the certain skills and how you personally learn to be relevant in this industry. You didn't go to college. There wasn't a playbook for what you do now. Of course, you worked in other businesses, and I'm sure those were great, like training grounds and practical experience. But for people who want to get into not just consulting, but maybe they want to be that CMO one day. They want to be that lead person who's not just, working on creative and how paid marketing is doing, but working on overall strategy. Like, what do you think are the steps, even though I know there's not a playbook? How can people get closer to that?
Well, I actually get this question all the time. I think there's a couple ways. One is you just read a ton of things, and some people are readers, and that works. Then there is you show up to events and you talk with real people. You talk to people in the industry, you talk to other CMOs, you talk to founders, you talk to the people that would hire for these roles, you talk to the people in those roles. And then the third way, which I think is the best, is you just, like, in this industry and many like it, there's not enough people within the industry that talk about the industry. And so, you write and you get eyeballs looking at you. And I think that is honestly the only differentiator between me and a lot of other people that might do the same thing is, like,
you don't have a seat at the table. You're making the table.
Yeah. And I mean, just this week, it happens all the time where I will get in touch with people that I would have never thought that I would be, like, getting asked to go get coffee with these people. And it's all because I put stuff out on the internet and people either resonate with it or they find it funny or they find it interesting or they find it relatable. And, the other thing I think that is very unique to me personally is and David can verify this, I don't read really much of anything. Whether it's books by people who've been in the industry or whether it's, like, really long form, thoughtful pieces, I rarely read industry newsletters. All of my knowledge comes from observation of just crawling the internet on my own time or just going out and talking to people. And, I... through the Cha Cha Matcha partnership, have a free lifetime card of Cha Cha Matcha. And so I offer free matcha to anybody and everybody. Like this week, the CMO of Hims and the CMO of Freshly were like, yeah, let's go get matcha, all the way to, like, DJs who tour the world because they're really good at what they do. It's like, I just try and talk to as many people as possible. And that's where I do most of my learning.
I think this is really important because Nick and I are extremely good friends, and I am like a read and write about it and also talk to person. But Nick and I have such a different learning strategy. And when I was talking earlier about not imitating what other people are doing, Nick, because he doesn't read, actually doesn't even know where the center of gravity is in direct to consumer, and you end up copying the people whose stuff you consume subconsciously. And because Nick doesn't do something that is recommended and almost said to be mandatory by everybody, he has an advantage. And I think that is such a beautiful thing, because what Nick is doing, he's actually observing things with his own eyes, which is wildly underrated. I mean, you go to all of these conferences and it's like the future of TikTok marketing, and you go survey the average person in the audience who's never downloaded TikTok. And it's like, okay, so you want to go learn from this thought leader, just observe yourself with your own eyes. And it's weird because I've been wondering what's going on here. This like serial devaluing of intuition, where people don't trust themselves, and we don't trust people who do things intuitively as much as we used to. And I am a believer in intuition. If you are observing and you're looking out at the world, trust yourself to have ideas.
The system doesn't reward that, though. People have to go sit in a classroom and learn from their thought leader on how to think.
This is what I like. Nick,
so it's a train. People have to train themselves how to do that.
Retrain themselves. Yeah. Like, humans are good at this. Nick was never indoctrinated into the school dogma because it never worked for him. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch Nick just look at the world in front of him and say, that's wrong, that's good, we need less of that, more of that, boom, here's an opportunity. And it's something that we need more of in the world.
Yes. So good.
David's my hype man on the side.
I love it. You just need to take him with you everywhere.
Yeah. So Nick does one thing that I always admire, and it's not what I do. So what I do is I go into the past and I look in weird places in the modern internet.
I have something.
And look for just crazy ideas that nobody is talking about. You know, I was talking earlier about the spotlight, where I always think, what is the spotlight? So what is everybody looking at? Everyone, you know, a lot of people are looking at Gary Vee. A lot of people are looking at national politics. A lot of people are looking at the China-America thing. A lot of people are looking at artificial intelligence. So I say, okay, I'm not going to look there as much. I am fascinated in particular by media theory from 1960s to 1970s. There are so many forgotten ideas there that nobody is talking about. And so I say, look, I'm not above copying people. Like, if everyone's going to be imitating Gary Vee, I'm going to be imitating other people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go imitate the forgotten people, the serially underestimated people, and bring their ideas back and actually borrow from them. You know, I study Patrick Collison a lot, who is the CEO of Stripe, which is, you know, the big Silicon Valley company. And having spent some time with him, one of the big things that I've learned is he isn't trying to come up with every idea himself. He's like, why should I? And what he's doing in terms of building what I think is going to be known as the most operationally efficient company in the world. I mean, you walk into Stripe headquarters and you're just like, this place is special. I got a text today from somebody who said, Stripe headquarters is the coolest place I've ever been.
Why is that?
It's special. It has an intellectual curiosity that is like, if Disneyland was a library, it would be Stripe. It has this full-on ambition to build products that allow people to use the internet to create economic opportunity for themselves. It is a special place.
Are they doing more than just a payment API?
Yeah, a lot more. So they're through Stripe Atlas, helping companies from around the world incubate in America.
Okay.
I think Stripe is the most special company in the world right now. And what I've learned from Patrick is that he is trying to go back, sort of like what I was saying earlier, and look at the ways of organizational management that we've actually forgotten. In 9 years, from 1961, John F. Kennedy does a talk at Rice University in Houston and says, we're going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And by 1969, we had a man walking on the moon. That is crazy. We had Palo Alto Research Center. We had Bell Labs. We had ARPA. We had all of these amazing big organizations, and we've forgotten that wisdom. And he has gone back and actually borrowed from them. And so where Nick is really looking at intuition, what I'm obsessed with is finding the forgotten ideas and bringing them into the future.
That's so sick. I was listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast, I think, with Ken Burns, the classic documentary filmmaker. It was such a good podcast. I challenge everyone to listen to it. But the thing that really stood out to me from it, which resonated so much with me, is he said back in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, everyone was watching 2-minute MTV music videos and no one had the attention span. So even back in the day, they were having that conversation of, Ken, no one's going to watch a 10-part, 1-hour docu-series on World War II. No one's going to watch that because all the kids are on MTV watching 2-minute music videos. And oh my gosh, I mean, like, well, first of all, look at his career. He did fine. I mean, he proved that educational, meaningful content, there is a need for that. But even guys, back in the 80s, 70s, 60s, people are like, oh no, long form content? What? The kids are just watching music videos, you know? So I think, like what you're saying, there's so many different themes that even in the past, they're just reoccurring. Even with the rise of social media, everyone's like, what? Long form? Are you kidding me? Everyone's watching 60-second videos on Instagram and Twitter and GIFs. That's all they need. But then we've seen this rise of really long form content where people need it. They crave it. And so whatever people are saying, oh, you can't do this because this is normal, is, well, time and time again has proven that's not, you know, the most on point thing.
I think it was Dwight Eisenhower, American president, who campaigned for the radio to not become a commercial medium because he thought that radio was the best tool ever invented for learning at scale. What ended up happening was radio became very commercialized. The snippets got shorter and shorter. It got distributed to a broader and broader audience. And 100 years later, long-form podcasting, right now you are engaging in what very well might be the single best tool for human education at scale ever created. Long-form podcasting is going to change our politics for the positive. It's going to allow people to realize that the lecture that they can get in their ear while walking to and from school is better than anything they got while they were sitting in their seat at school. They're going to realize that this is going to be the gateway drug, long-form podcasting, to what you can do learning on the internet.
I love that.
Transformative medium. And you're engaging in it right now.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on any of that? I felt like you grabbed for the mic.
No.
Any closing thoughts, Nick?
Closing thoughts. Let's see. This year, I've learned the value of hard work and taking care of yourself, and I encourage people to focus on those two first, and then focus on socializing and having fun. And actually, something I learned from David is, this is so random now, but hanging with friends in smaller settings for longer periods of time versus larger settings and shorter periods of time is a lot more beneficial and better use of time. There's a lot better context and conversation. Okay. And I've found that it, even when you move those relationships into group settings, they're much stronger group settings. But over to David for his random thoughts.
Well, I only hang out with people basically in groups of 2 or 3. This is only, so like this is almost a hard rule, for 2 hours or more. So I do a couple little coffee meetings here and now, but Nick and I went to Chicago. We did an entire weekend. I'm doing 5 days with a friend in Florida around the new year. I did 3 hours with a friend last night. I only hang out with people for extremely long amounts of time because what you realize is it takes an hour just to kind of get warmed up with somebody. And unfortunately, the Google Calendar invite defaults to 30 minutes or an hour. So that's what most people do for hanging out. I try to spend a lot of time alone every day, and then one really long chunk of time with somebody almost every single day, and it's made my relationship so much deeper.
You do that every day?
Basically every single day.
Wow.
I'm doing on Sunday doing 5 hours with somebody. I did 4 days with one friend in Michigan this summer, 6 days with another friend in Michigan this summer.
I love that you approach relationships and friendships tactically, because you almost have to in the world of scheduling. And
friendship is so important to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
And the way that society tells you to be friends with people, I think leads to really empty relationships. I think that depth and time is what you need to really begin to appreciate somebody, because all of us wear masks. We all have a shield over ourselves to try to communicate the person that we want other people to think we are. And it is only with that time that you can break through the facade that everyone is putting on, but actually come to love the other person for who they actually are.
Yeah. I hack it by being like, hey, I have a podcast that's like an hour and a half. Come be on my podcast. We can talk so I can get some content out of it.
It works.
Yeah, that works. What are the 2, 3, 4 things that people should find you guys on after this?
My 2 go-tos, one's Twitter, MR or Mr. Sharma. MR Sharma, Mr. Sharma. And then the one I'm more active on is my community phone number, and that phone number is 917-905-2340.
Amazing.
I got to make a jingle out of it.
I love that, though. There's a little bit of transparency there where you're like, it's my community phone number, because celebrities are promoting this like it's the real phone number, and it's just people are feeling scammed. You know,
it's, I'm actually very, very transparent about it, because there's like, they know. Yeah. It's not like I'm putting my T-Mobile cell phone number on the internet,
when you get that bounce back message of sign up here at community.
You get one automated message, and then everything else is just me. Yeah. But that's where I try and spend like an hour, 2 hours a day on there.
Love it.
Yeah, just responding to everybody.
That's dope.
For me, I check out my course, Rite of Passage. Nick was talking about how writing on the internet is how he gets all of these amazing opportunities. I have systematized writing on the internet into an education system. It's very intense, but it exists nowhere else, and the results have just been fantastic. PERELL.com, PERELL.com is my website. You can read all my writing there. I have a podcast called the North Star Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at David_Perell.
Amazing. Guys, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Sarah.
If y'all enjoyed this podcast, leave me that review on the Apple Podcast. We start out every episode with a shout out to one of you in the Peachy fam.
I have an idea. If you leave a review, and what's a code word people can put in the review so we know they heard this episode?
Filthy.
Filthy. If you leave a review and mention the word filthy, 1 month from the date this podcast comes out, David and I will each send 2 people $100 each on Venmo. So 4 people will get $100.
How are you going to get in touch with these people? Should they put their Venmo? It's gonna look like I'm paying people for reviews.
Well, no, David and I are paying people for your reviews.
I know, but how are you gonna get their Venmo?
We'll figure out how to. You're gonna text me or tweet David or tweet me, and we're gonna Venmo out $400 for reviews.
So how about we put a little bit of process behind this? People can leave the review, and then they just screenshot it and then tweet it to Nick and David.
Perfect.
I think that's the best way to do it.
All right. I'm saving $200.
$400 on the table.
Wow, I love this, guys.
10 seconds to write a review?
It takes 10 seconds. And you no longer, if you want to use the word filthy, you can. But since you're tweeting at them, you don't have to if it doesn't fit in the review.
I'm in.
Amazing. I love it. And then I'm keeping it going through the first week of January. If you sign up for my monthly newsletter, which probably won't even get to you every month because I don't get around to it. I'm using it as a form, one, to make sure I have all of you guys on my email if YouTube deletes my channel one day. But two, I'm sending out free Peachy merch to 5 people every single week from this email list I'm picking at random. So I'm just sending free Peachy merch, free That Creative Life merch to y'all. But thank you so much for listening. That Creative Life every single Monday. Make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to.